I mean, you can't hear me, so it doesn't really matter what I say at this point. Thank you to everyone who is tuning in on Twitch right now. For the first time, we got this presentation live streamed, thanks to the folks at First TV, so that is very awesome. And now, I think it's time to start. Welcome to Effective First Strategies for Designing Competition, everyone. Welcome. Woo! This is the 15th season I've been giving this presentation. I started giving it in a small lecture room on the campus of the University of Waterloo. Do we have any Waterloo students in the house right now? One? Water? Okay, we could get some right there. Shankar, did you go to Oh, no, you didn't. You went to U of T, yeah. Well, you know, we all make mistakes. That's one, Shankar. Don't worry, one time Shankar had a birthday party, and he invited all of our friends except me, but then told all of them not to tell me because he didn't want me to be there. So I can roast him as much as I want. This was maybe 6 years ago? 5 years ago? But we're just going to keep talking about it, man. All right, let's jump to the next slide. This is me. This is not an interesting slide. Most of those numbers are out of date. I think we've won more stuff since then. But basically, I hate this slide. Let's go on to the next one. You're not here to hear about me. You're here to hear about effective first strategies. You know, like, you're here for a reason. Okay, we got a lot to talk about, and I don't know how much we're going to cover, but First has given us almost 2 hours today, and we are the last presentation slot, so maybe we'll go long. One thing I want to really stress to everyone, I like it when this is an interactive presentation. I do not want to just talk at you for 2 hours. You have a question, throw your hand up, and I will come over to you. We'll try and do it. We'll try and go back and forth. I want this presentation to be shaped around what you want to hear, not what I want to talk about. So if there's something you want me to dwell on, we can do that. If we want this to be a highly detailed talk on linear algebra of OPR and the meaning of all that, I would be thrilled to do that. I don't know how many of you would be thrilled, but I think I might be able to thrill you with it because linear algebra is actually fun despite what anyone is going to tell you. I know a lot of people want to talk about 2020, and they want to talk about what's going to happen to First without the bag. I think we can try and lay that into the context of strategic design and how that's going to play into the golden rules, so we can talk a little bit about that. And then, I mean, we're at the championship event, and I think, how many people here are not competing this weekend? Okay, so some of you. There are a lot of you who are competing, and we can talk about different strategies. We can maybe even touch on the 2 offense, 1 defense versus the Copioli strategy of the 3 offense, and talk about why that's just wrong. No, I'm kidding. There's a lot of different ways to play this game, and that's why it's an awesome game. But we're just going to kind of feel things out and see where we go from there, So yeah, there's a lot of things. How many we'll get to, I don't know. Let's go. Next slide. I like to frame this presentation with some quotes, and everyone's going to, some people are going to be like, man, I just want to hear about robots. And I'm like, if you just want to hear about robots, there's other presentations you can go to, but I really do believe that when we join First and we join the First Robotics Competition or the First Tech Challenge, we learn a lot about problem solving, and these problem solving abilities don't just affect us in First, they affect us in our lives. And I think it's important to try and develop a basis and a groundwork and a framework for what we're trying to do. So, number 1, enthusiasm is one of the most powerful engines of success. When you do a thing, do it with all your might. Put your whole soul into it. Stamp it with your own personality. Be active, be energetic, be enthusiastic and faithful, and you will accomplish your object. Nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm. Why does this matter? Can I tell you, the best teams in First, people are always asking, how do these teams stay so good year after year? What is the magic sauce of 254? What is 2056 doing right? Lots of you do this too, but they love First. Everyone is completely passionate and driven towards this goal. What are they doing in their spare time? They're watching match videos. What are they doing in their spare time? They're designing up swerve drives. Actually, those 2 teams aren't ever dividing a swerve drive, but others may be. But it goes to show, and we got a lot of high school students in here. How many high school juniors and seniors do we have in the room? Just throw your hands up. That's amazing. That's amazing. And you are in a phase in your life where everyone is telling you what to do, and it sucks. Because everyone thinks they know what you should do for your career, and everyone loves to throw this stuff at you. Well, you should be an engineer because you'll make a lot of money. And first of all, not always true. Hate to break it to you. Secondly, that's not a way to live your life. And thirdly, if you want to make a lot of money, it's not by just choosing a specific field, it's choosing something that you love to do. And people are going to be like, well, if I just love something, I'll make a lot of money. It's like, no, you also have to be good at it. You have to be useful. But it's really important to understand that if you go into a field, and I'll use computer science as an example, because there's a lot of money to be made, and there's a lot of people who are very talented at it. But there's also a lot of people who love computer science, and they love programming. How many programmers do we have in the room? Okay, so we've got the weirdos here. That's cool. All right, just understanding that. Programmers and the ones who love programming have no problem staying up 24, 36 hours in a row coding. At the University of Waterloo, we had labs, and we literally would go in with super soakers and soap sometimes and pour soap on them and shoot them because they needed a bath because they just never left the room. It was crazy. But there were other programmers who just were like, well, I'm at Waterloo to do computer science because I heard I can make a lot of money and I can get an intern. Back in my day, everyone wanted an internship at Microsoft. Now, no, not so much, but now everyone wants an internship at Facebook or at Google or the next startup. You want to get those hot internships? If you walk into the interview and they're going to be like, oh, can you send us a link to your GitHub page? Oh, I don't have one. I don't really code in my spare time. But the people who love programming, who are constantly coding, will have this passion will have developed into more skills and more opportunities. And when you are not passionate about a field, those that you are working with, you may be smarter than them and you may be more talented, but they will go further because they will have put in more time. One of the most terrifying things for really, really bright high school students is when you realize that being really, really bright is most rewarded only in high school. When you get on to university and you get onto the work world, the most valuable skill is hard work and determination. And the brightest high school students, and I'm just off on a tangent right here. I'm just this is my personal nightmare or whatever. Shankar understands this from the high school that we went to. It was very interesting. But learning how to work and put energy into things, as opposed to being the kid who was just always the smartest and never had to work, man, there's a path. I'm going to go way too long on this one, so I'm just going to dive off of that. But find something you are passionate about and explore it. And I'd like to think that most of you who are in this room, other than the ones who were forced to be here by your mentors, are passionate about first, and we're going to dive in, because that's really cool when you have a lot of people who are passionate about the same thing, and we can get really excited about something that other people aren't excited about, and then you can go on to your teams and take this forward and then bring excellence to your teams. We are going to relentlessly chase perfection, knowing we will full well not catch it, because nothing is perfect. But we are going to relentlessly chase it, because in the process, we will catch excellence. I am not remotely interested in just being good. There is a trap out there. It's called the trap of perfectionism. And if you spend too much time trying to be perfect, you can endanger yourself, and perfectionism is the enemy of getting a good job done. However, it is important to dream big, and it is important to have big goals. Applying this to the first robotics competition, you talk to any of the top teams, talk to them week 6, oh, is your robot done? The answer is always going to be no. Why is that? Because your robot, if you were one of the top teams, your robot is never done. You can always be improving. You go around the pits right now, I guarantee you, if you got a top 5 list of every division, you go to those 5 teams, they are not just sitting there, they are probably trying to figure out a double or triple climb right now. Why? Because what they've done so far they know is good, and they're very proud of it, but you have to try and get better. There's no such thing as a perfect robot. There has never been a perfect robot. You can even think about 254 last season. They never lost a match. You ask them if the robot was perfect? No way. There were things that could always be improved, and they were constantly tweaking. Why did they never lose a match? Because they kept on working. I liken this to trying to find a unicorn. There are no unicorns. I hate to break it to you. They are just not a thing. Don't try and tell me a rhinoceros is a unicorn. That's not a unicorn. It is fact. That is not a unicorn. However, if you go around the world looking for a unicorn, you are going to find so many awesome things along the way. You might see a giraffe, which is pretty freaking cool, So, or you might run into Drake somewhere. I don't know. But if you keep searching for excellence within your own self, you are going to catch excellence along the way. And that's why it's important to dream big. However, we're going to talk about expectations and limits and all that good stuff. This next quote is boring. I'm not going to do that one. Limits, like fears, are often just an illusion. What I was talking about earlier, high school juniors, high school seniors, everyone's telling you what to do. There's also a lot of people right now who are probably telling you what you cannot do. I will tell you a story of a good friend of mine. Libby met her at Houston Championship. She was on a first team and did great and decided to go study mechanical engineering. And she struggled in her first year of mechanical engineering. And I'm not going to name the school because I don't want to shame them, but it was pretty shameful. And her academic advisor, she told her, engineering isn't the right fit. Look at you and look what mechanical engineers look like. Literal quote. At one of the best engineering schools in North America. And so she was discouraged. Dropped out of mechanical engineering because of that. But you know what she is now? You know what they call her? Doctor! She reevaluated and said, you know what? If the world of engineering doesn't want me, that's fine. I'm going to go study kinesiology. I'm going to go to med school. And limits, like fears, are often just an illusion. Do not trust the limits that people out there are throwing at you. Sometimes people are actually trying to give you good advice. However, sometimes people are imposing limits on you based on the limits that they have themselves. And they can't see themselves doing something as amazing as what you want to try and do. I spend a lot of time working with startup companies now, and the amount of people that tell these 20-year-olds and 25-year-olds that, this company's never going to go anywhere, no one's going to invest in that, someone else is going to do it. I'll tell you another story about a former 11-14 mentor, and he was crazy. He was the one, does anyone remember the harpoons from 2005, that nonsense? He was the one who designed those. You remember those, right? Yeah, you were on that alliance. He came to me one time, and he's like, hey, can I spend some money on some parts? I want to make an autonomous golf cart. And I was like, sure, go at it. And he did that, and then he's like, I think I could do something with this. And I'm like, well, what do you want to do? And he's like, I want to start a company doing autonomous vehicles. I was like, hey man, you're one of the smartest kids I know, go for it. So many people told him, that's impossible. The autonomous car is going to be developed by Ford, by GM, by Uber, by someone, not just a random University of Waterloo student. Right now, you can look him up on the Forbes website. So by the way, he started doing this in 2015. It is now 2019. You can look him up on the Forbes website, on the Forbes Under 30. His name is Alex Rodriguez. He is the CEO and founder of Embark Technologies, worth $65 million, doing autonomous big rigs. And it's not just in development. They have a trucking lane from Nevada to Arizona. 25 years old. A few years ago, he was in this presentation room. 7 years ago, he started a rookie team out in Calgary. Limits. These self-imposed limits are crazy, especially for the people in this room who've done so much excellent stuff. At the same time, you need to be realistic. You have to understand that didn't happen without an immense amount of hard work, and sometimes we overlook that. How much you hear these cool stories, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to start a company worth $65 million too. Check me in 6 years. Well, you got to do something in the 6 years. But there's so much potential here. I see it all the time with the best students at the best schools. So many of them just want to go work for a big company, which is cool. There's nothing wrong with that. Go make bank. Go work for Goldman. Go do you. But sometimes I see incredibly bright people who could be the next big thing and solving the world's big problems, who aren't exploring that because of limits, or their parents are just telling them to go get a job. So if you see something you believe in and you're passionate about, if we just take the power that we have here with all the girls and boys that we have in the first program, and maybe just 1% worked on trying to solve big problems, like the clean water crisis, or the energy crisis, or trying to get the oil out of the Athabasca tar sands without destroying our environment at the same time. If people just kind of worked on those, oh man, we can actually solve big problems, and that is bigger than who's going to win on Einstein or whatever. So, just saying. Next slide. I've talked a lot about nonsense now. Let's talk about robots, since I think that's what most of you are here for. Strategic design. What is strategic design? First of all, it's a made-up term. I'll have to admit that. But like Thor said in Infinity War, all words are made up. It makes a lot of sense. Pretty smart for an Asgardian. Seriously, I could do a whole presentation on Infinity War and Endgame. We could just talk about that. Yeah. No spoilers, no. I will talk about any theory that does not have spoilers and is not the Ant-Man Thanos theory. If anyone is going to, no, all of you, no. That is the worst. That is the worst. Leave. If you don't know what this theory is, don't Google it. Don't. Oh. Reason number 731 that Reddit is the worst place on the internet. See, now okay. Strategic design. It's a concept that I came up with about 15 years ago to try to explain the process of coming up with a strategy for your design. Designing and building a robot is cool and a lot of fun. But what do you want the robot to do? And that's the first question. And I'm working on a whole new presentation and a whole new white paper with the Compass Alliance on goal setting, which would hopefully be available this summer. It was supposed to be available in January, but life happened. But how do we set our goals? I'm going to ignore that here. And I'm just going to assume that we all have the same goal in this room, which is dangerous. But I'm going to assume that the goal is to do well in competition. However, that is not the only goal teams have. And teams have to design things for their own reasons. Some teams prefer creativity and ingenuity over a consistent robot. I'm uncomfortable with that. However, I'm not on your team. And teams have to do what they are passionate about and what they are excited about. Don't ever let someone tell you how to run your team. It's obnoxious. But for the scope of this presentation, we're going in with the goal is we want a robot that does well in competition. And that's important to know because it's going to shape a lot of decisions. I'm not even going to talk about the other ones because we have a lot of stuff to cover. Next slide. Okay, so we've got our goal. Our goal is to win. And so you can have different levels of it. And this is what's interesting about FIRST right now. When I started doing FIRST, there was about 200 teams. Now there are thousands upon thousands. There are different levels of competitions. And your goal may be, I would like to make the elimination rounds at both our district events. Reasonable goal. Your goal may be, I would like to win our district championship as the second pick. Your goal may be, I would like to captain an alliance on Einstein. Those 4 different goals would have 4 completely different design requirements. You cannot approach those 4 goals with the same design requirements. So it's important to know what you're thinking in terms of your goals. But before we even get there, the first thing you have to do is read the rules to figure out this game. Because once you've set your goals, now how do you go about achieving them? What is the path to doing it? And the first thing I always say to do is look at the game and the rules, not just the animation. Don't be that person. Please do not be that person who just watches the animation and just starts designing and caddying and like pulling out saws and screwdrivers and all those other things I never touched during a build season. Be the person who reads the rules and really tries to break it down. Every possible way to score points. Sometimes it is very obvious how to score points, sometimes it is not. For example, this year, lots of people, and it's not just scoring points, but it's enabling points. How do you make your alliance partner score points? How do you make it easier for your alliance to score points? For example, one really good way to enable points this year that a lot of people missed early in the season was putting null panels out. It was super easy. You put null panels out, and then you just have to score cargo, which was a lot easier to score than panels on the cargo ship. A lot of teams missed that, as seen by week 1 and week 2, when you'd see matches with no null panels, and all the cargo spills out, and then no one scores there, and it was just a travesty. These are the things that are important. Teams who were properly utilizing null panels in week 1 and week 2 had a huge strategic advantage. All that came from was reading like 2 lines of the manual that other teams had skipped. Examine every possible way to prevent your opponents from scoring. Defense. It is a thing. I hate it. However, I will play the game with the rules that are delivered to me, and I will take advantage of any openings that exist. Would I like a game with no defense? Yes. Why would I like that? I still think that this is an engineering challenge, and I think for the rookie team who has never gone to a competition and has designed their arm and it's going like this, that they just want to score that one piece of cargo, and then some veteran team who's converted into a box on wheels to play defense just slams into them, that is not inspiring to me. However, I understand why that veteran team's doing it. I think these are things that could be fixed in game design. But I do a lot of game design. I could talk a lot about that, and maybe we will if people have some questions about it later on. All right. When you're from Toronto, you have to just play Drake. It's just what we do. Oh, language. Woo! Still at a first event. All right, so we are good. I don't know what I was talking about. All right, so we talked about how to score points, and we've talked about setting your objectives. But in first, it is no longer as simple as the most points wins the match. In some years, it's not that simple at all. Going back, way back, when I first started doing this, usually winning matches wasn't actually relevant at all. Your ranking system was based on your opponent's score, and you would get 3 times the value of your opponent's score as your own score, which was kind of crazy. And there was a lot of weird strategies back then, and teams who got it did really well, and teams who didn't get it, because there'd be teams who'd be celebrating, yeah, we just won 20-0. Congratulations, you got 0 points. Seriously. So the games were weird then. Then we had what I consider the golden era, where for the longest time it was just wins and losses. So that was simple strategy-wise. You just try and win the match. Then we came into this really cool era, and I'm talking about the paradigm shift that happened after 2015, the ranking point era, where now you have your main objective to win the match, where you can get 2 ranking points, but you have these secondary objectives. And these are really important to understand because they are going to affect how you strategically design your robot, and they're going to affect how you prioritize things. It is really important to design for ranking points. So you have to look to see, is this ranking point a group task or an individual task? For example, Gears in 2017, that was not an individual task unless you were Team 610. That was a group task. This last year, with getting 3 climbs, was that it? And you could use the Elevate for a free one. That could be turned into an individual task because you could claim your free one with the Elevate and then you could lift someone. But man, that's hard. And we're going to talk about hard things in a second. But it's really important looking at the rocket this year. Group task or individual task. I think this is one that a lot of us messed up because I think a lot of us saw that, oh yeah, this is a group task. This will be fine. 2 robots can work on that. And then we saw 2 robots working on a rocket is normally a terrain wreck. Or it's actually a robot wreck because it's just 2 robots in each other's way, especially if you put 6 panels up first and then everyone's going for the exact same spot. You can do it in tandem as such, but the top teams were finding that they could do it on their own. Climbing. This is a really, really interesting one because a lot of people saw it as an individual task. It's like, oh yeah, I got to go up to level 3 and just get someone else to park. But once we got to week 6 or week 7, there were a lot of robots who only had a level 2 climb who were getting those ranking points because you could do 2 level 2s and a level 1. And what's really interesting to think about is we had a shift all of a sudden, and maybe the level 3 climb wasn't as important as it was. And this is what I talk about when I'm saying designing for winning a week 1 event or designing for winning a district championship or designing for a world championship. It's analyzing to see where it's going. In my opinion, one of the best robots in the world this year is Team 1241. They do not have a level 3 climb, which everyone thought was crazy. I'm just going to move this up here so it's a little bit louder. Because 1241 looks like a team who should have a level 3 climb. They seem like they're totally capable of doing that. But they decided that, yeah, it might hurt us at our early districts, but by the time we get to the provincial championship, we can just do a level 2, someone else will do a level 2, and it's going to be fine, and we're going to spend our time working on scoring. And guess what? If you look within Ontario, they ended up being the 3rd best scorer in the province, and they probably would not have been if they had put the level 3 climb on. But they were able to finish the robot earlier, practice more, score, and that's why top teams decided not to pick the other level 3 climbs because they were just so much better of a scorer. It was you didn't need another level 3 at that point, and we'll talk about that because that's another paradigm shift. But it's why it's important to understand how the season will shift and what you are aiming for and what you're designing for. This is hard stuff, but these decisions will shape a successful or unsuccessful build season based on your own goals. Next slide. This is a fun one. It's kind of irrelevant, but it isn't because it goes back to chasing perfection, catching excellence along the way. What is a chokehold strategy? Again, This is another made-up term. I know, Thor, you can make it up words, whatever. But, like, I needed something to call this. A chokehold strategy is a strategy, when executed, guarantees victory independent of any action by your opponents. In old first games, there used to be chokehold opportunities where you could just do one strategy and take over every single match. However, the game design process has evolved since 2002. The designers are much better at it, and the first thing they do is to make sure their games don't have a chokehold, because chokeholds can be boring. I want to talk about my favorite chokehold, because this was like the coolest game. Or it wasn't if you were one of the other, all 700 other teams who didn't have the chokehold strategy. There were 3 goals on the field, mobile goals. They spun around. They each weighed 180 pounds. They were separated on the field, and like, how wide's the field? Like, almost like this room. And so, like, one goal would be here, and then the next one was right here, and then the next one was over here. They were very far away. Goals got you 10 points if you parked them into your own goal zone. 10 points each. So if I grab 3 goals somehow and I get them to my goal zone, I get 30 points. You could also put balls in goals. The goals didn't belong to anyone. They were for both alliances. If you put balls in goals, each ball counted for 1 point if the goal was in your goal zone. However, if I take these 3 goals, and I'm playing Shankar, and I take them to my goal zone, any balls that Shankar has put in these goals, are worth nothing. So right now, I've locked him out of ball points, 30-0. But there was more scoring. You got 10 points for every robot that ended up in your home zone at the end of the match. This was back in the era of 2-on-2. So you could get 20 for getting your own teams back there, just drive and park. Things were very weird back then. The rules were very, very different. A lot of you weren't alive then, and it's probably good because things were scary. You were allowed to grab robots and take them with you back then. So if you had grabbed a robot and took it with you, you could grab one robot and be like, okay, so I got 2 and like I got 1, like I got 30 points or whatever. But like that's where you were going to max out at. So, because again, if I'm parked in my goal zone, they're not taking me, so they've taken 2 of them and my partner. It's 30-30. It's a tie. They had tiebreakers back then. They made more sense than they do now. Tiebreakers, Shankar. How do those make you feel? Yeah. Just saying, 3 times in a row. But it's 30-30. Who's going to win this match? The tiebreaker was who's got the most goals. So, if I grabbed all 3 goals and got them to my goal zone, I would win every match. Here's the problem. The goals weighed 180 pounds, and they were super, super far away. It was the Wild West back in 2002. There weren't a lot of rules. The rules that exist now are because of what happened in 2002. Team 71 built a robot, and they made it skinny, but to the full height limit. First thing it would do was fall over. Its wheels were facing outwards. It would fall over. Then these massive pneumatic arms, the robot was a friggin' pterodactyl, or at least what we think pterodactyls are like, because they went extinct 65 million years ago. But the pterodactyl arms would just fly out and fly at the goals. They had a super, super high gear to get to the goals, and they would be the first ones on, and they would grab them. And when they grabbed the goal, they could not let go, literally. They designed it so no one was going to be able to pull them off. It was locked on. They had to come on the field mechanically and unscrew to release the goals. They would grab 3 goals, and then they'd go and pull them all back in and tuck it into a nice tight package. Then they shifted gears, and they moved on to file cards, which are the things you use to clean a file, which are very illegal for drivetrains now, but they were basically like Velcro onto the carpet. And then they moved at 3/4 of an inch a second, dragging all this with them. You want to try and push them? They got 540 extra pounds of traction on them right now. And they were moving very slowly. What happens if they want to turn left or turn right? They can't. They made trade-offs, said, we don't need to turn. We're just going to go straight and just keep inching and inching and inching. And they did this all their way to a world championship. Everyone talks about Team 254 now. They won 4 world championships. Is it up to 4 now? Almost 5. Almost 5. That was tragic last weekend. That was heartbreaking. Team 71 won 4 world championships from the span of 1997 to 2004. They were the Cheesy Poofs before the Cheesy Poofs were the Cheesy Poofs. Team 71, They are the legends of first. Like, people in my generation of first, that was the goal. There was no internet back then. Everyone would line up outside their pit at championship to watch them uncrate because you wanted to know what was in there. It was the coolest thing ever. My favorite match of 71 that year with their chokehold was one time they went to go out and grab the goals, and they grabbed two of them, and then their third one missed the goal, but it grabbed on to the hot team, Team 67. Remember what I said? They couldn't let go? So they went, "Urgh!" and they yanked the hot team back with them. Team 68 grabbed onto one goal. And 68, this is when they were truly Trucktown Thunder. And like no one messed with Trucktown. Like they were just like this unpushable force. Oh, they made a mistake because they could have just taken their one goal and then filled it with balls from the human player. They could have taken this match. They decided to grab onto one of the goals that 71 had. And so now 71 has 3 goals attached to them and 2 robots. And they inched and dragged this mass of like 700 pounds of stuff to the spot. And like the best thing was, how many like MCs and game announcers do we have in the room? Put your hand up. Okay, so you know how like Blair always tells us during a match, like, don't ever say the match is over. Try and make it seem like something's happening. That's always been the rule. In 2002, no. There was this one announcer, Ron Partridge from New England. He had like a thick New England accent, and he got tired of trying to make these matches seem interesting. And he'd be like, I don't want to say, it's never over until it's over, but there ain't much hope. Because Beatty was just, and then he started reading the sponsors. He's like, welcome to the first championship, sponsored by NASA. And it was like, he had nothing else to say. And so why do I talk about chokehold strategies if they aren't very relevant anymore? Because if you try and find a chokehold strategy and you try and break down the game and do this analysis, it's like chasing perfection. You will catch excellence. You will find out what the optimal strategies are. This is a very mathematical task. You line up and you put all the ways to score points on a board and you make a column and you say, okay, what can I lock in and what's that going to prevent my opponent from getting, and try and get to the best balance point. This year, there's not a chokehold strategy, but there is a balance point where if you know what your alliance is capable of, by setting up how many null panels you use, you can put yourself in an advantageous position over your opponent, especially if you're running cargo ship autos, because you can lock in points early. And so you should be thinking about this, especially anyone out here who makes it to Einstein, because I saw it in Houston. Everyone was trying to do the math of, okay, if I've got a double climb, they have a triple climb, how many null panels do I have to pull off to make sure I can catch up to their max possible score? Only applies at the highest level because you have to be maxing the field to do this. But I mean, have you seen the Curie division? Like, my favorite post on Chief recently was when someone's like, how does first assign the divisions? And someone goes, very poorly. And like, by saying it's my favorite thing on Chief, that's a really low bar, because that website is a train wreck and a travesty. Still better than Reddit. No one has brought the Ant-Man theory up there. But it's important to do this sort of analysis. Next slide. How are we doing for time? 5:41. Oh, geez, that's terrible. Okay, cost-benefit analysis. So we talked about analyzing the game, figuring out how much things are worth point-wise, but that doesn't necessarily explain how much they're worth to your team. Cost-benefit analysis is not a made-up term, actually. This is something anyone who's taken an economics course is well aware of. But for every task in the game, you need to compare the difficulty of accomplishing the task to the reward for doing so. For example, we'll go back to last year, where lifting a robot was basically a guaranteed ranking point, as long as someone on your alliance could use the vault competently. So it's like a lot of teams were like, we have to do that. It is the guaranteed ranking point, that is massive, except it was an incredibly difficult task. Too difficult for most teams. We're going to get to this in a little bit, but I'm just going to keep tying it in there. The biggest reason FRC teams fail is because they try and do too much. It's really about knowing your own limits, setting reasonable goals, and functioning properly. How many times this year have we seen teams who built a robot to score on the high level of the rocket. And then they go to the rocket, and it's like this. It's the worst. And they do it for like 3 matches. And then they're like, you know what? We're just going to score on the cargo ship. And they score on the cargo ship, and everything's great. And they'll go back and be like, yeah, we had a successful season. We were good at the cargo ship. But imagine if you didn't build that device to score on the high levels of the rocket. Imagine what you could do with that time. I want to talk about one of our world champions from last week, Team 973. They won the world championship without being able to score on the high level of the rocket. Even more so, they were not the 3rd robot or the 4th robot. They were the #1 seed in their division without being able to score on the high level of the rocket. So I talked to their lead mentor, Adam Hurd, and I was like, I want to talk about you in my presentation, so please tell me why you made this decision. And they were trying to go for the high level of the rocket, but they came to like week 4, week 5 of the build season, and they realized we could keep working on this, and we could probably get this robot done at our first event. You know, we're going to have to show up at the first event, keep, add stuff on. Or we could just abandon the top level right now and spend more time on practice, more time on vision, and more time getting everything rock solid. And other mentors on their team and other people in the community were like, what are you going to do at championship if you can't score on the top level of the rocket? You're not going to be valuable to an alliance. You're too good of a team to be a 2nd-round pick, and you're going to fall in that terrible morass. And they said, no, like this is what our limits are this year on our team. This is a team that's won multiple world championships in the past. So like this is way higher resource than almost every team that is in this room from what I've spotted here. But they dialed it back and still won the world championship as the alliance captain. Not a fluke. Practice and programming time is way more valuable than a lot of these added functionalities that we're going to be talking about. And that's so important as you're hitting your priority lists. But it's why you have to, and I mean, we're going to go into the world of economics here, and who's familiar with the term opportunity cost? I feel good. What an opportunity cost is, and if you aren't familiar and you want to learn, go on the Khan Academy and just look it up and watch those videos or whatever, and it's super great. For every decision you make, there is an opportunity cost, and that is the cost of what you gave up to make that decision. So in pure microeconomics terms, people always kind of talk about it. It's like, so I spent, last week, I spent $500 on a new pair of Jordans. However, what could that $500 be used on elsewhere? That is my opportunity cost. So like groceries for however many weeks, or rent or whatever. Those are the things that you gave up for this. In robots, there's so many different types of opportunity costs. When you add a subsystem or you prioritize a subsystem, there is the weight, there is the space, there is the time spent on it. And the time spent, what could that be used for? And people misunderstand the opportunity cost of complicating your robots, and that opportunity cost is practice and programming time, and it is also an increased risk of failure, because the more complicated your robot is, the more likely it is to fail. So all important things to think about. But before we even talk about the opportunity cost, you have to figure out what the real costs are in terms of how hard something is to accomplish. So always, we are trying to find the tasks that offer the most amount of points for the least amount of difficulty. And sometimes we were talking earlier about enabling points. One of the cool things to look at is one really neat way of enabling a whole lot of points this year was just to make your robot a little bit smaller. Just to make your robot a little bit smaller. If you do that at the very beginning of the season, it's not as hard of a constraint as people realize. But by going a little bit smaller, there's a little bit more room on the platform if you've gone up to level 3, and you get these neat double climbs. And those are the little things where it's not much effort. These teams who had stilt-based robots that can go up on the platform, but then could lift again so someone could come under them. These are the little things that you can do that don't cost anything, but get you a huge amount of points. And those are super, super valuable. If you can identify those during your game analysis process, you will lead yourself to much more success. Next slide. So now we're at the point, we've analyzed the game. we figured out the tasks that are most important to the game, and we now figured out the difficulty involved with them. So we want to have a priority list. And how many people are on a team here who had an actual priority list this year? And I'm not going to embarrass you if you're on one of the ones who didn't. You're the minority. Congratulations, you're probably the successful ones. These priority lists are super, super important. Why? Because it is important to record your full thoughts and full analysis of the game, and it's important to make sure this priority list shapes your design process. Every year, teams will come to the point where it is week 5 or week 6, and they are either overweight or they are running out of time or running out of money, running out of room on your CAW. I don't even want to talk about that CAW, bill of materials nonsense. But how do you decide what to trade off? You have to go back to your priority list. So many times, I see teams who have, it's the rocket thing all over again. Teams realize that in elims, this game is a low-based game for the most part. And cargo ship matters. Comes to the end of the season, they're a little bit overweight. What are they prioritizing? They're still working on high rocket. It's like, ugh. But if you had high rocket as a low priority, why are you still working on it? But even worse, teams never really did this priority. They had it in their head somewhere, but they never followed through on it. And so these are the reasons why it's important to have a priority list. I like to have 2 separate ones. I like to look at robot qualities and robot functionality separately. So when I'm talking about robot qualities this year, I think it would have been really, really cool if someone said, our number 1 priority for robot quality is we want to be small. We want to enable level 3 climbs. That would be a good priority. A lot of people prioritize speed this year. I think that was a mistake. I think if you look at the layout of the field, you may realize that speed didn't matter because you're only traveling short distances. Unless you're a defense robot, you're not going to the other side of the field. And acceleration would be what I wanted to prioritize. You may have looked at the game and realized that the field is filled with choke points and that defense was going to be a thing. How do you get around defense? Well, there's different ways of doing it. You can be quick and nimble, like 118. They decided they wanted to prioritize on having a light robot so they could zip around the defense. So they came in at 95 pounds, which is insane if you've looked at 118's robot. Or you can be a big beast and just take up those lanes because you want to play defense or whatever. Or you want to go with 6 Neos in your drive because you want to push through teams. But you can't know what decisions you want to make, like using Neos or whatnot, until you have this priority list. The next piece of the priority list is your robot functionality, and you just got to go from the top to bottom, and we're going to talk about that on the next slide. Okay, priority lists. This year, we got you all in the room. This is a pop quiz. People fail this one a lot. If you've been to this presentation before, please don't answer. What should have been the number 1 priority for every team in this room? Oh, I love you people. I forgive you for the Ant-Man theory. Drive. Why is the drive the number 1 priority always? Why does the drive have to be the number 1 priority? Right here, Midnight Inventor.
Doesn't it kind of decide like what your entire robot's going to do for the rest of the season, whether it's going to be a defense bot or it's going to be a fast scoring bot?
You're on the right track. You're on the right track. The reason why drive is the most important, because if everything else fails, you still have your drivetrain, and you can pivot. If you design a robot with like a plunger on it or something, actually, I won't make fun of the plunger because the plunger robot 6378 in Ontario was phenomenal. 10 panels in a match with the plunger on a scissor lift. You think I'm kidding? Who here, you guys saw the plunger. Wasn't it just absolutely crazy? 10 panels in a match. The robot was a plunger on a scissor lift. Limits, like fears, are often just an illusion. You know the amount of, okay, let me use my graciously professional language. The amount of non-graciously professional people who walked by their pit and pointed at their robot and laughed. And you know what I laughed at? When they didn't make the elimination rounds because the plunger did. They were finalists at an event. They were like, oh. Another reason about keep it simple. That's like 3 slides ahead. But your drivetrain is the core of your robot. And if your drivetrain is prioritized, everything else fails, you can still pivot to defense. And as long as First gives us games where defense is incentivized like this one, you can do great. One of my favorite examples for this year, I'm just going to break the secret to everyone. I think the best defensive robot in the world this year was Team 771 in Ontario. Their robot, drivetrain, they just threw 6 sims on it. Kitbot. Or actually, no, it wasn't a Kitbot. I think it was like a Vex Pro Drive in a day, or one of those sorts of things. They had a nice little panel mech or whatever, and the panel mech did well for early season events. But by the point when the panel mech wasn't able to keep up, they were able to pivot to defense. And they were phenomenal. But they prioritized defense. They prioritized their drivetrain and threw extra motors at it. They threw extra weight at it. They knew they were going to be slamming into other robots. And by throwing those resources at their drivetrain, when the game surpassed them for their other priorities, their top priority, nothing was surpassing them. And as such, they are the Ontario provincial champions. And in my opinion, it was as valuable as the other 2 teams on their alliance, because they took Team Dave from scoring about 12. Hey, Shankar. They took Team Dave from scoring about 12 game pieces a match to, in the final matches, scoring 4 and 3. And that's the power of defense. Because that differential of 8 game pieces, how many teams score 8 game pieces in a match? Guess what? Not many, unless you listen to Terrible Scouts, which we'll talk about 17 slides down the road. Prioritizing your drivetrain is super important. People talk about mecanum drives a lot, and I'm not here to be the one who bashes on mecanum drives, but I will say this. When it comes to pivoting to defense, if you have a mecanum drive on your robot, it is very hard to pivot to defense. And so that's why you wonder why so many teams keep doing 6 tractions, 6 tractions, 6 tractions. It's because all else fails, they can be a defense robot. And it's harder to do that. So there's advantages you get out of a properly programmed mecanum bot. If you're just putting 4 mecanum wheels on your robot and not programming them and just driving in tank drive, I mean, you're just donating money, just like... But mecanum drives provide a lot of advantages in terms of agility if it's properly programmed. However, you give those back if you ever have to pivot. So it's something to think about. So I'm going to flash to the next slide. So we talked about priority list number 1, move. Your robot has to be able to move. But number 2, people always want to get into, well, our next priority after our drive is scoring. And that is great. It is important to score points. However, you cannot score points unless you can acquire a game piece somehow. That acquisition does not necessarily have to be from the ground. It can be from the human player slot, as we saw with panels, obviously, this year, and for cargo. But you need to prioritize acquisition and release. A lot of teams now are doing what's called cycle time analysis, which is really cool, where you're basically trying to shorten your cycle times for scoring. And this year, everyone was like, oh, wow, the field, everything's on one half of the field. We can do twice as many cycles. And I was just like, warning, warning, danger, danger. Because that's not how it works. If you were to make a graph, if you were to make a function of cycle time as expressed by the 3 components of cycle time, your drive distance, that variable, would have a super, super low constant value, less than 1, attached to it, because that is not the determining factor. If you were to build a model, you could use AI to build this model. You probably should. It might think of things that we aren't thinking of. But the 2 factors are acquisition time and release time. There is nothing worse than watching a robot who is super fast, because they look impressive, and every scout who isn't a good scout will be wowed by them. Drive and slam into the loading station, and then they pull out without a panel. And then they go back, and they pull out without a panel. And then they go back, and then they wiggle, wiggle, and wiggle, and then they got it, and they drive out super, super fast. That acquisition time is the killer. The other one is when you go to score. There are some teams who just come and just boom, slap it on. He's yours. I figured it was okay, Thumby, However, there are other teams who get to the goal and then are just shaking around. That extra time is a killer. And that's what's going to increase your cycle time. And so... Oh, perfect. Shoot door kid. Yeah, that was great. That yellow card that your brother got us, lovely. That was awesome. I'm kidding. It didn't matter. We still lost. Oh. After you did, though. But It's really important to think about. Your cycle times are determined by your acquisition and your release. Free advice for everyone. If your acquisition for a game piece involves things that look like tennis rackets and you're going and clamping on them, no. Go to the Vex website, go to the Rev website, go to the Andy Mark website, and investigate rollers. This is not a design presentation, but I'm just saying, you want to be able, the one thing I always say about intakes, touch it and you own it. So you want to be able to slam into whatever it is and slurp that thing up and go to the goal and out. Please don't do that. That's disgusting. There's like a lot of germs involved. But you really just want to pull that in and spit that right out. And that acquisition and release time has to be prioritized. And that's what prototyping is for. And this is not a design presentation again, but I'm just saying you want to work to minimize those times. So you just get to the goal and release. Watch videos of 1323 this year. Everyone gets wowed by their swerve drive and how they just swerve from point to point. Watch videos of 971. Everyone gets wowed by how they drive, but their release time is just instantaneous. And that is how you speed things up. Next slide. Okay, if you're only going to remember two things from this presentation, and they aren't the original quotes at the opening, it is these golden rules. Golden rule number 1, always build within your team's limits. We talked about limits earlier. Lots of people are defining limits for you. Don't let someone define your own limits. You define your limits. How do you figure them out? I need to change this slide because I use the terrible term manpower, which is like from the 60s, and that's just got to go. But your limits are defined by your budget, your experience, and the amount of people you have on your team. And how many people and resources do we have to put into this? If you were a team who has just migrated from FTC, welcome to the program, and you have 8 kids on your team, and you are brand new to FRC, your limits are going to be very different than a 12-year veteran team who has a bunch of alumni mentors who've been around for years and years and 40 students who are working. And you can do different things. People always ask me, how do these top teams stay so good? It's experience. They have loads and loads of experience. And why does that experience matter? Because the first robotics competition is different than any other engineering challenge out there. You could go to NASA or Ford or GM and bring in their 4 best mechanical engineers to your team. And they would design up something cool, but they do not have the experience to understand things like cycle times and what has worked in the past. And that experience is super, super valuable. Teams who have that, I mean, everyone wants to know how did Ontario teams get so good suddenly? When did that happen? And part of it was the bar raised by 1114 in 2056, but part of it was there's a culture in Ontario where the alumni just don't go away. They graduate and they come back to their teams. And so that 4 years of experience they have, it's now 5 years, and 6 years, and 7 years, and 8 years. And they've seen so many things. And by seeing all that, they understand how to do this analysis and how to define their own limits. And they know what's going to work and what's not going to work. But that is so, so important to evaluate your limits realistically. Most teams do not get this because it is easy to get to a competition and look at like a wicked cool robot and that is simple and be like, oh, we could have done that. Or like, I'm terrified now because 254 and 195 did turrets this year. And they did turrets successfully. And now everyone's going to want to do a turret. Except turrets are really, really hard. Even 254 took 2 events to figure out their turret. 195 took 2 events to figure out their turret. If it took 254 2 events, it's going to take you 5 years to figure it out. I'm not even kidding. No, like this is serious. The amount of experience that they have. The next one. Golden rule number 2. Now that you've figured out your limits. If a team has 30 units of robot functions, and robot functions have a maximum of a 10, it's better to do 3 things at 10 out of 10 than 5 at 6 out of 10. The jack of all trades is the master of none. Team 2056, arguably the best team in the world the last few years outside of Team 254. I invite you to go look at their robot. I invite all of you to go to their pit to look at their robot, actually, because that would be hilarious. But seriously, if you look at their robot, It is simple. There is no handoff intake. There is no bidirectional scoring. It is a standard stilt climber. Their intake doesn't even have anything for centering the ball. The robot is all simple. Why are they consistently one of the best teams in the world? They know what their limits are, and they know to not spend any functions on extra things they don't need. But the things they do will always be 10 out of 10 and be perfect. This is a team that never has a climb fail. This is a team that doesn't drop game pieces. This is a team that robot never seems to break down. Can you imagine being on that team where the robot never breaks down? Where they get to leave the pit every night early for dinner at like 5 p.m.? It's crazy. How do they do that? By staying simple. If simple is good enough for them, why isn't it good enough for the rest of us? And that's a question you have to ask yourself. Now, maybe your team values ingenuity and you want to do creative, crazy things. That's cool. But if you come into this with your goal is to win a district championship or to win a world championship, you need to think about simplifying. I mean, this year especially, handoff intakes, there is value in them because you change your center of gravity. You're not lifting a whole intake up. It is really cool stuff. But the amount you gain there for those extra couple percent, but the amount of work you have to put in to do something like that when you could just have a claw that takes the ball and goes up on its own. This year, the amount of teams who wanted to score through the back, because it was so cool last year, lots of teams did that. Do some strategic analysis. Last year, made sense for autonomous mode, because you wanted to score as many cubes in auto as possible. So you go straight at the scale and score. And then you go back and you grab one down here and then you score. Like, it made sense. This year, when you're going out to score, you got your game piece, you go into the loading station, I got it. I'm just going to go backwards, 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 and I'm going to score over my, oh no, wait, I still have to turn in one of the directions. If I still have to turn, I'm not gaining as much. You're still gaining something by going through the back. I'm not trying to tell you that these things aren't good ideas. I'm trying to tell you these are expensive ideas. I'm trying to tell you that most teams within your limits can't afford these ideas. And maybe if you dialed it back a bit, you can do well. Just simple can win. Don't get distracted by the most complicated robots at Worlds, especially even if they're doing well, because often they have a huge set of resources that you don't have. On the flip side, as your team gets more experienced, start cautiously pushing a few boundaries. This applies for everything. We should always be trying to grow as people. We're trying to develop our skill sets. So don't sell yourself short. Don't build something too simple. It's about finding that right mesh point. How do you find that mesh point? That is hard. That is really, really hard. Experience matters. But talk to other teams. Talk to the teams that you admire. Figure out how they're doing it. And there's no simple answer for that one. If I could just give you that simple answer, I mean, oh man, robots would be so much cooler. But it's hard. It takes a lot of teams a lot of years. We saw 1323. They're the best team in the world this year. There's no doubt about it. And we saw them at Worlds last week, and they were just freaking phenomenal. And we saw them on Einstein the year before that, and they were amazing. The year before that, they were pretty good. You go back a few years, there was like kind of an average, above average team. It took them a long time to get to the point they're at. They needed to develop more experience. They needed to figure things out. They kept the same drive base year after year to allow for them to focus on other areas, and that sort of growth. It is possible to go from an average team to being the best team in the world. Team 1323 did it. It is a journey that takes multiple years and involves alumni coming back and this sort of sustained process. But if you're passionate about this program, you probably are going to come back. On that note, for all the graduating seniors in this room who want to come back and mentor next year, and I've just talked about how cool it is when alumni come back or whatever, this program's not going away. First, it's sustainable and it's going to be around. Please, please, please spend your first year of university being a university student. Maybe just come and volunteer at an event or two. The first year of university is it is this life-changing experience. You've spent your whole life with people setting up limits for you and telling you who you are. You've probably gone to school with the same people. The person you are may not be the person you truly are. It is just the image that is projected of you of all these years in your life. When you get to university, you can be whoever you want. And that is such a cool, cool feeling. But it's important for you to spend that time figuring out who you are And it's hard to figure out who you are if you keep going back and doing the same things you did and just going back and hanging out with your high school friends. Kind of weird. It's kind of hard, and explore. Join some clubs. There are, if you love robots, you want to do robot-like things, there are plenty of cooler design clubs than FIRST, man. Mini Baja, solar car, autonomous vehicles. You can do any of that stuff. Your FIRST team will still be there, and you'll come back with new skill sets, and you'll be so much more valuable to them. And I just think that's really, really important. And also, in all this self-discovery stuff, university's hard. If you're super, super smart in high school, university is actually harder because you've never learned how to work and everything was super easy for you. And if you weren't super, super smart in high school, university's hard because university's hard and you weren't super, super smart. For everyone, it is an intense experience. And we know what FIRST is. It's an intense experience. And trying to balance build season with midterms and in a pre-med program or an engineering program or any program. Also, for everyone out there who's like, oh yeah, well that's just like an arts major, that's not a hard program. Shut up. University is hard, man, and honestly, engineers have it kind of good because your classes are 80% final, 15% midterm, 5% assignments. You're not writing 15-page papers and stuff. Art students don't have it great. It's kind of a miserable experience. The reason I became a math major was because when I was 18, I was lazy, and I was just like, oh, cool, this course is 90% final and 10% midterm. I don't have to do anything. I'll just show up for the final and write it, but the thought of writing research papers, as much as the classes sounded so cool, I was like, well, that's a lot of work. I don't want to do that. Kind of stupid of me. I should have just been a history major. Life would have been way cooler. Seriously, man. I could talk about we could do a presentation on the Cold War right now if we wanted to. Next slide, trade-offs. We've already started talking about this. And this slide, it's hard to put it at this point in the presentation because it kind of applies everywhere. As you're going, engineering is all about trade-offs. And we've talked about creating a priority list. We've talked about figuring out our limits. But now you have to figure out what you're going to trade off, what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. But the simple answer is we've covered it. We know we shouldn't do everything. We know the jack of all trades is the master of none. That's from golden rule number 2. We know that we have well-defined limits. That's from golden rule number 1. And we've built a priority list. So it's very simple. We're going to just go through our priority list and try and do the things at the top. And if we don't get to the things at the bottom, that's okay. This year on 11/14, when the priority list was set, things like scoring backwards and handoff intakes, they were all talked about. They were all on the priority list, but they were just lower. And we were like, okay, let's just go through this. It would be cool to have this added degree of functionality, but it's not going to define our season, and we want to get the robot done early. Shankar, when was 2056's robot done this year? When was your robot, not done, but ready to start practicing? It was week 4. Sorry, you live in London, I understand. England. He came all the way back. What a good guy. But no, seriously, being done early matters. And that's why you don't want to go deeper on your priority list. Remember opportunity costs? This is the stuff that all comes into play. But this slide, engineering trade-offs are really, really complicated. However, if you do the proper strategic analysis and strategic design, your trade-offs become obvious. And remember, the golden rules. Teams who try and do more than they're capable of tend to fail. And that's rough. Hi, I've got a question.
So how do you deal with students when you, as a team, have made your priority list, you have consensus, the majority all agrees, and then a few of your students are stuck on those lower priorities and they're part of your design team?
That is a great question. And so this is why I like having the question period, because that's something I would not have touched normally. But I think, how many people can relate to that situation in this room? Throw your hand up. Yeah. So one of the things on a FIRST team is I've never thought of the engineering design process or any problem-solving process as a democratic process. That means it is not about what the majority thinks. It's about establishing consensus. And so if you were a team and you've come up with a priority list, hopefully you've achieved consensus by going through that process. You cannot please all the people all the time. Some people are going to have different opinions, and that's okay. One of the most important things on any first team is leadership. That includes adult leadership and student leadership. And the leaders on your team need to be the people who are respected the most and who can help drive consensus and who can help rally the team when consensus isn't achieved. And it happens a lot where the team will be working towards objectives and end of the season's coming and you have to make a decision. And leadership will make a hard decision. And they'll say, we are abandoning priorities number 5 and 6. We need to focus on 3 and 4 right now. 1 and 2 are done. Good job. But we need to focus on 3 and 4. And the students who may have been in charge of 5 and 6 are going to be incredibly disappointed. It's totally understandable. They're passionate. They love this stuff. They've been working on it since January. This is their concept. A lot of people ask me what the biggest takeaway coolest thing that 11-14 students learn that other students don't. And I will say that 11-14 students are the best at throwing away good ideas for better ideas. And if you could see the junkyard of prototypes or junkyard of robot subsystems over the years that have been thrown away because we decided to go in another direction, it is, I'm just trying to think of a good example, but like the amount of frisbee shooters we could have just slapped on any robot and they would have won events. But we're just like, nope, needs to be better, needs to be faster, needs to be whatever. But how those students cope with this is a testament to the leadership and the culture on your team. And whenever I talk about building culture on a first team, I feel guilty because there's no easy way to do it. It is hard. It is hard to establish a culture where all students are willing to work towards the same goal, even if it means giving up on personal goals and giving up on personal projects. But it starts from the top. The leadership has to exhibit this behavior as well. So, for example, leadership needs to admit when they are wrong and they've made mistakes, or leadership has to be willing to let go of one of their own ideas, even though with their leadership position, they could probably pull the veto card. But if they ever do that, why is anyone else going to want to abandon their ideas? Leaders have to embody the characteristics that they want the culture to have. I give leadership seminars in general on this sort of thing, and it's a very different topic than this. But I think the most important thing to remember is the leaders need to embody the culture you're trying to develop, and that you want to build a culture where no one person is bigger than the team, and everyone is working towards team goals. I always cringe when there's a team, like for example this year, and they'll win the Autonomous Award, and then they'll hand the trophy to the one kid who did most of the programming. I cringe at that. That kid deserves recognition for doing that programming and stuff, but that is a team award. Every award in FIRST is a team award. I even consider the Woody Flowers Award a team award because the award submission that goes into it and the mentor is inspired by all the students. And so buoying up team goals over individual ones and individual recognition really helps in these sorts of situations. There's no easy solution for this one. So many teams, I've spoken to many teams this year who are struggling with that exact same issue. And it is hard, but it takes time to build culture. That's the best answer I can give you. Is that decent? Awesome. Next slide. This one's like a quick one. We'll go through it. What time we got, Libby? Oh, man. I just talk so much. It is great. Okay, you have all these things you want to do. You have like priority number 3 and priority number 4. If you can combine them into one mechanism, that is super, super awesome. That's why I love robots this year, whose acquiring and release are in the same process. It's why I cringe a little bit at the handoffs, even though there's so many teams who do handoffs well. It means you have 2 different functions and 2 different mechanical subsystems that then have to interact. Also, whenever you have subsystems interacting, transition points on robots are killer. Getting the ball to flow from one part of the robot to the other part of the robot, it may sound simple in concept, but it is really difficult in practice. And You see teams, like you look at 1241's robot, and it's just so amazing. The ball just like zips through there right there. There is so much automation to go into that. And like when it doesn't work, oh, it's bad because then you have a ball stuck in your robot and then you're just slamming into the wall trying to get rid of it. You know, you don't want to be in that position. So cool things that I like. This year, lining up to get flush against the Rocket is something that is not necessarily easy to do. I love teams whose intake mechanisms would help line them up. I love teams who use the sheet metal hole to line themselves up. Like little things like that are, it's just a wood block to go into the sheet metal hole. If you have your intake float a little bit this year so it can pivot, that's amazing, and that is cheap, and that really helps with acquisition and release, and it's a multi-function thing, which is cool. Next slide. Other strategic design tips. Okay, the strategic analysis is a must. I think everyone gets that now. Hopefully you do. There's a tendency to skip this stage and to head right into design and implementation because design and implementation are fun. How many people are like the CAD people on their team in this room? I know what you guys do on the first day of build season. You pull out SolidWorks and you start sketching and there's models and everything. It's like, that is great, but slow down and go through this process and go through everything that's going on. This is a very Zen statement. You must know what you want to do before you can figure out how to do it. You must know what you want your robot to do before you can actually design it. That's why strategic design matters. We talked about being realistic when evaluating limits and evaluating resources. You have to be realistic when evaluating strategies. Let's flash back. Let's talk about this year. Average team across first. How many game pieces is the average team scoring per match? Someone want to take a guess? Someone who, I'm going to go to you because we made good eye contact. Hey, Jagger. Hi. Is that your actual name?
Yes, it is.
Sweet. Okay. How many game pieces do you think?
I'm going to say somewhere around 1.7.
Okay. That's a good answer. I want to talk to someone else. Who do I want to talk to? Right over here. How many game pieces per match? 3? Anyone else? Who thinks it's a lot higher? Who thinks it's a lot higher? What do you think, man? Think it's 6? This year, the average number of game pieces per match, based on the data that I've collected, some direct, some using component OPR, is around 2.5. Think about that. That means half the teams, ish, medians and means aren't always lined up, but half the teams, ish, are scoring less than 2.5 game pieces per match. That means there is a huge chunk of teams, like a third of first, who spends an entire match placing 1 game piece on average. That is their season. It's very important to be realistic when evaluating strategies, because if you aren't realistic, if you think the average team is scoring 6 or 8 or 10 game pieces, you are going to set unrealistic goals for yourself. Because if, say you say, we want to be an above average team this year, you're going to try and base around that point. So I like to use rules of thumb. This didn't apply fully this year because of the cycling distance and the such, but in general, and this applies for every first game since 2005, since the 3-on-3 era, in general, the elite teams can do 8 full field cycles per match in perfect conditions. You think back 2008, 11-14 on an open field, 8 hurdles. You think back to 2011, the top teams, best teams in like a clear match with no defense, 8 tubes. Usually, it just kind of falls into this because of the length of the field, the distance, the speed of the robots, whatever. This year, it's a little bit different. This year, I would say the top teams are probably at 12, and that's because of the shorter distance and the huge amount of game piece availability. But the rule of thumb, 2017, gears, people did not get it. Gears were so the easiest game piece first is given us because you could just grab them from the loader. You didn't need anything active to score them. It was still averaging about 2 or 3. Middle tier teams are typically averaging 4 game pieces, 4 cycles per match. That is a really good rule of thumb. If you were doing 4 or 5 cargo a match at district play this year, you were making the elimination rounds, usually as a first round pick. Things change as the season goes on. These averages also change as the season goes on. Let's talk about it, guys. There is no more bag in FRC. All our bags, They're done. We can burn them. Don't burn them. That's not good for the environment. But we can throw them out. Don't throw them in the ocean. A turtle's going to get stuck in it. What are we going to do with these bags, actually? Ooh, rain barriers. I like that. For the water game. All right. I can't believe I made that joke. Ugh. So, no. But it's important to think about how we're going to change our design processes for a world without a bag. Because what's going to happen early in the season is going to be very different from what happens late in the season. And these are things that teams need to be aware of. I was just in a meeting with the Hall of Fame, and we were talking about, how everyone's like, oh, well, with the bag gone, we don't need practice robots anymore. And lots of teams aren't going to build practice robots. I saw the look. Some teams are going to continue building practice robots because they don't want to wear down their competition robot. There's another tier of teams. The tier of teams right now who's building 2.5, 3 robots. They're still going to continue to build a comp robot. They might build a practice robot, but they are now going to build a third robot. Their championship robot. We don't know if the rules are going to allow this, but look out, folks. Everyone who wanted to pop the bag, and when this nonsense went on about, it's not going to help the elite teams. It's going to help the middle tier teams the most. The elite teams were lying to you. They were tricking you because they wanted the bag popped. Because it's going to make the elite teams even more crazy. Because when they start building championship-only robots, they're going to wait around and watch to see what happens the first 5 weeks of the season. And everyone's like, it's too crazy. Teams can't copy teams in first. It's so hard. It's so expensive. There's some teams out there with the resources to do it. And that is going to be scary depending on how the rules are written. Just saying, the bag, there's a quote from JFK. I don't know if it's actually true because he's a politician, but he was one of the good ones. He says the Chinese use 2 character strokes to represent crisis. One is for danger, and one is for opportunity. And with the bag changes, I'm not saying it's a crisis, but it's a big change, and there will be danger to some teams because they aren't going to be able to adapt to the changes properly, but there is opportunity for others. And the real opportunity is for those teams who take the new rules and truly digest them and understand what you can do and how you can improve your team because of it. If they go with you can make any changes at any point in the season, it would be strategically foolish if your goal is to win to not be copying other teams. Now, you may have moral objections and other objections to that, and that is totally understandable. But in my prior life, I ran another robotics competition. And at that robotics competition, everyone at the World Championship basically ended up with the same robot. Different scale, but these are things to start thinking about as we go on. And I think the Hall of Fame is going to try and work together to provide some guidance for teams on how to handle the out-of-bag world. But there's a lot going on, and all this analysis will play directly into it. But remember, rules of thumb, middle-tier teams, usually around 4 cycles per match. Average teams over a season, like 2-ish or 3-ish. Set your goals accordingly. Because if you set your goal, we want to make sure we're doing 5 or 6 cycles per match. You will be more likely to attain that goal, and you will be more likely to design a robot that is, you won't try and do something crazy. This year, some of my favorite robots were the buckets. The bucket that just goes to the loading station, ball rolls in, they drive to the cargo ship, turn 90 degrees, ball rolls out. It was super simple, and for a lot of teams with less resources, that was the easiest way to do 6 cargo cycles a match and murder a cargo ship. Could you have made it better by adding rollers to suck the ball? Of course you could have. But for those teams, those resources may not have been there. There may have been an opportunity cost, but just getting the bucket done early can lead to success, and teams like that have qualified for Worlds. So I'm just saying there's nothing wrong with simplicity. Next slide. Remember, you have partners. It's okay to leave stuff. 973 left the top of the rocket to their partners, and they still seeded number 1 at the championship. They were pulling off 4 RP matches. Because what they could do is they could kill bottom halves of both rockets, and then the defender can only defend one side now, and their other robot gets a clean path to finish that rocket off. You can always leave things to your partners. However, this is first. Please don't leave too much to your partners. Because we've all gotten qualification matches before, schedules, and we all know what that can be like. There's a lot of people who don't come to this seminar who play out there. I'll just leave it at that. This is something cool that I really think more teams should do when you're working on your priority list. Try and think of the different permutations of robots that can exist in a season. We belong 1305. Except when you trip over people like that. Think of the different combinations of robots that could exist, like, oh, with this type of this type of intake, this type of whatever, and then say, what would happen if you have a match with like 2 of type A and 1 of type B against 2 of type C and 1 of type D? Who would win that match? And start playing out those permutations, and if you notice that one form of robot is consistently winning, maybe your priority list needs to morph in that direction. Next slide. All right, strategic design is over. We've gone through all of that. We are going to talk about scouting now, and this is, I think a lot of people are here. Who's here for the scouting portion of the presentation? Woo, boy! This is good. Why is scouting important? It is a great opportunity to get a leg up on the competition. Guess what? We are at the championship now. We are done. Practice matches are happening. It is very difficult to keep improving your robot, but how can you improve your performance on the field? It is by scouting and having good data. There are so much. It is crazy how many resources there are out there for scouting now. The Blue Alliance is the best thing to happen to the first robotics competition since alliances, I want to say. The website has everything. Data, match videos, things that you could have only dreamed of in the past, accessible to everyone. You can learn about your opponents and you can plan how you're playing. Also, scouting is an excellent way to get more students involved in the competition and get more students excited about STEAM and get them excited about FIRST. When I joined my first team, I tell this story often. Mark Bredner, 2008 Championship Woody Flowers Award winner, was our high school teacher at our school. And we had a robotics team that seemed really nerdy. And so he came up to me, he's like, hey, I want you to join the robotics team. And I'm like, yeah, no. He's like, why not? I'm like, I don't want to hang out with your losers. Was literally what I said. And he's like, no, I think you'd be into it. I'm like, no, there's no way I'm going to be into this. He goes, no, like a lot of what we do is kind of like what a football offensive coordinator does or like a baseball scout. I was like, oh, yeah, it's still a bunch of losers. I'm not doing it. I decided to pop in and check it out. And what I saw was, wow, this is like, because high school sports, you don't scout, you know? Like, you don't do that stuff. It's just too small for scale. But, like, robots, you do. And I was like, this is crazy. I can bring some real value to this. And, like, this is stuff that I like doing. Like, this is, like, my dream at that point in life was to be, like, you know, an offensive coordinator, to be, like, a Chip Kelly sort of guy. And I was just like, I can do this with robots, and this might actually be fun, even though all these kids are weird and smell bad. But, like, you can get a whole other subset of kids onto the team. And if we aren't reaching out to other communities, we as mentors in this program are failing. Because what we're trying to do in FIRST is we are trying to change the culture, and you do not change the culture by just appealing to kids who already like robots. It's about reaching outside the tent and bringing more people in, and scouting is a cool way to do it. And you can get, there's so much neat stuff that goes into it. Why is it crucial? It is important because you can predict your opponent's strategy for future matches. Most FRC teams behave in very static manners, meaning they do the exact same thing every time, meaning they like to score on the same rocket, whether right or left. If you scout accurately, you can know where that team is going to be scoring, and you can position your defenders accordingly. By taking a team who always scores on the left and forcing them to go to the right rocket, you are going to lower their scoring value. Even if a team is just parking there, could make the difference between winning a match. We've seen with the score differentials, but how can you know this stuff? You can only know it with scouting. It's essential for alliance picking. Please, please, please stop picking alliances based on the rankings. I hate it. It just makes me cringe. you need to know which robots work well with your robot. So it's not just having sheer data, it's seeing where they go on the field. And there's so many things you can do now. Next slide. All right, let's talk about advanced scouting, because advanced scouting has this blown through the world. In 2004, myself and my college roommate Ian McKenzie, we were running Team 1114 back then, and we were frustrated with match data. All we got was scores back then, scores of matches, and we were and we were using average score as a metric of team success, but of course, it was not a great metric because of alliances, and we know that your average score could be buoyed or whatever. What if there's some way of us pulling out the individual contributions of each team in the match without us being there? And so I was like, well, why don't we just create a giant matrix where each row in the matrix is the teams who were in the match, and the column is the amount of points they scored. And what if we had a row for every single match? And all of a sudden, and we'll go into the math of this, wait a second, that's going to be a square matrix that is invertible, meaning there is a solution. And that solution will be the average contribution of each team at that event to the scores. And it was just our minds exploded. And if we had more entrepreneurial sense right then, we would have sold that to a National Basketball Association team. Because 2 years later, NBA teams started using a concept called adjusted plus minus. And what adjusted plus minus is, you take the 5 players who are on the basketball court, and for every block of time, you look at the amount of points that are scored, and you set that up as a row of a matrix. And you then have a row for every combination of players that is in there, and that gets you the contribution of the players. Not the amount of points they scored, but the amount of points they facilitated and allowed for. And this was mind-blowing in the NBA, because it took Allen Iverson, who was the highest scoring player in the NBA, and it showed that his adjusted plus-minus, his teams went on the court, even though he was scoring more points than any of the 10 players on the court, had a negative differential when he was on the court. And it was showing that what a lot of people had thought, that Allen Iverson took so many shots that even though he was scoring a lot, he was taking away better opportunities from their teammates. And that was where adjusted plus-minus was. And they came up with that, and a few guys like Daryl Morey, and he's the only one I can think of right now. I forget the other guy's name, but he was the analytics director for the Cavaliers. I interviewed with him at one point. But they made millions on this. And Ian and I came up with the same thing for robots, except you don't make millions in robots or whatever. So we kept it internal for 1114 for a bunch of years. Then others came up with the same concept on their own, because it's not groundbreaking. It's just linear algebra. And so then eventually we started going forward with it. But a lot of people call it OPR, because that's a stupid, catchy brand name that someone came up with. I like to refer to it as calculated contribution. You're calculating the contribution that each team has made towards the match, and not just with their scoring. So let's go to the next slide. So how we do it, I could give a whole presentation about OPR. It would be a lot of linear algebra. I'm not going to do it right now. These slides are available online on the Symbotics website. Go through it, and you can see things that you have here. But what's really important with OPR is, now First releases so much game data. Before, you just got the final score and the teams of the match. Now you get the amount of cargo scored, the amount of panels scored, the locations or whatever. So you can, instead of doing OPR by total score, you can do OPR by panels. You can do OPR by cargo, and you get all sorts of crazy data suddenly. And it's magical. So this year, the plunger, I was talking about them. Best panel scoring row, pure, all they did was panels, nothing else. They had a component OPR that showed that they were scoring 4 cargo a match. And I showed it to someone, I was like, see, the failings of OPR. They don't even have a cargo mechanism. All this math is stupid. And I was like, it took me a couple minutes. Why did the data show that? Right, because they were scoring so many panels, their teammates in matches that they were paired with a plunger could score more cargo. And that's why they had that score. It wasn't because they were scoring cargo, they were enabling cargo scoring. And that is the beauty of mathematics. Because mathematics, if you looked at that robot, you would see, oh, only has a panel mech, can't do cargo, not useful for an alliance that needs cargo. However, the math will tell you, no, they're doing something else. And this is just simple linear algebra. We haven't touched on any AI or whatever in this system. But the fact that it could pull that information out, that is scary. And that is beautiful. And so when I saw that epiphany, I was just like, yes. This year, every year OPR has different value. How valuable is this data? Depends on the game. Let's hit the next slide. 2019, OPR is back to being a somewhat useful metric. Why? The game is fairly separable. Teams complete tasks independently from their partners for the most part. There is some stuff we talked about with panels enabling cargo and the such, but it's not like last year where OPR was a disaster. Because you could score 1 cube on the scale, or you could score 15 cubes on the scale, and it would get you the same amount of points. So as the math tries to pull this stuff apart, it couldn't. What OPR told you in 2018 was, if you had a high OPR, it showed that you were able to facilitate high scores. It didn't necessarily mean you were a high cube scoring robot. It did mean that you were playing the scales intelligently and able to get advantages. Linear scoring this year really helps. When you have exponential scoring or multipliers, OPR, which is using linear algebra, maybe we could do a new model where we balance things off of curves and do a regression. But by doing a least squares analysis, like a least squares analysis is literally like straight lines linear, so nonlinear scoring messes with it. Also, there were lots of playing pieces on the field. So in games where you have fewer playing pieces, if you have 3 good robots on the field, they will choke themselves out. And they cannot maximize their score because they are limited by the playing pieces. This year, not so much. There's only a limited amount of playing pieces when 254 and 3310 are on the same alliance. And so as such, OPR means something. Where OPR got hurt a little bit was for climbing robots, because for the most part, you could only get 1 robot on level 3, especially in qualifying matches. Component OPRs are the greatest. Thanks to First for providing scoring breakdowns. I also want to thank Caleb Sykes. I don't know if he's in the room, but he is the new, I will take the mantle and pass it to him as the new data guru in First. He has put out so much. 11.14, we've stopped releasing our scouting database. Why? Because Caleb Sykes' database is out there, and it is better. It has so much. You could pull out his database and literally type in the event that you're going to and get projected standings. That use a mix between component OPR and ELO, which is beyond the scope of this presentation. But there are so many people doing so many cool things out there right now. And there's so much data available. And it's just I want to thank First for having an API that anyone can tap into to grab all this data. And it's up to you to use it. And it's really cool to see how the community's done this. Also, if you can make good use of data in First and you document what you've done with that data, you can get any data analysis job as an intern or when you graduate. And if you really enjoy this stuff, if you enjoy this stuff to spend the time working on your own versions of OPR and stuff, then you do enjoy this, you're passionate about it, you want a job in data science, and man, there's a world out there for you. Next slide. Pit scouting. I don't want to talk about it. I mean, it's great to get information. It's good to know what teams are doing. Please don't only rely on data. OPR is great. However, actual obtained data matters. And it is important to look at things like, can I fit on the level 3 hab with this robot? Don't use OPR to figure that out. Go to the pit and figure this stuff out. Also, we know that a lot of teams use pit scouting to keep kids busy. And it sucks for them because they probably don't want to be doing this job and they're just doing it because they have to. But can we be nice to them when they come to your pit and not prank them and not try and embarrass them and not try and tell them dumb things so they go back to their teams? Because a lot of times these are kids who've just joined First and they're not sure if they want to be on a team and they're trying to find their niche. And if they go and be like, what's the top speed of how many wheels do you have on your robot? And you answer, 33. And the kid goes, okay. And he goes back to his team and says that. And then they laugh at him or they laugh at her. You think they're going to want to come back to the team? I get it's a little bit funny. And do it to your friends. My policy is make fun of your own friends. Don't make fun of strangers. You don't know them. You don't have that relationship. The reason I can make fun of Shankar is because he's one of my best friends. That's what I do. This relationship here has been based on me roasting her for the past 9 years. She makes fun of me sometimes, but it doesn't usually work. But see, this is me making fun of you.
I guess I don't need to do your slides then. You do your job.
You'll probably be late with them anyways. But the whole thing is, this whole pit scouting thing is treat kids with respect. I get it's funny to have that joke at their expense. Have that joke at your teammates' expense who you're friends with and can take the joke. Don't have it as at some random kids, because that could be like a really bad experience for them. So this is speaking from a position of guilt. This is speaking from someone who was not the best person as a high school student or a college student. So I encourage others to try and be better people than I was at that point. That was a big admission right there. That was crazy. Okay, we're coming down to the end of this presentation, but I want to talk more about scouting. So what do you do when you're match scouting? It is important to get data that cannot be obtained elsewise. And so what can't you get this year? This year you'll get a total of how many panels were scored, how many cargo were scored, but you will not know which teams scored them. Component OPR can give you an idea. However, OPR's biggest limitation is sample size. Everything we do in FIRST when it comes to data analysis, the sample size is terrible. We're dealing with 10 match samples, 12 match samples at districts. It is not enough data. So if you're just using OPR, that is the limitations of it. You need to collect information on how many times, scoring attempts and failures. The new modern age thing that a lot of teams are doing is cycle times. So not just looking at how many times teams score, but the amount of time it takes them from loading to score. Because then that eliminates any time they spend dancing in between. This data is very important to collect because it's going to shape your pick list, it's going to shape your understanding of strategies, it's going to shape everything. Other things to look at. You can tell a lot about a team if you look at more than just the scoring data. It doesn't matter anymore, but in the past, I loved, especially when it came to your second round pick list where you don't have much to go on, I loved to pick teams who were really quick at getting to their joysticks after autonomous. And you might be saying, why? Does that split second matter? No, it doesn't actually matter. However, teams that would go right to their joysticks, you could tell they cared more about winning. And what do I want on my alliance? Girls and guys who care about winning, who want to win, who have that drive. And so I care about the human player who's going to stretch before a match and who's going to take that extra detail. People make fun of this. I like to look at bumper quality. It is a very transparent thing. You see it right there. It's like when you're going on a date and you look at your date's shoes. Because you can see if someone put time into this date and if they care about their appearance. And that might matter to you. It might not matter to you. With bumper fabric, bumper construction, if they care enough to have nice-looking bumpers, they were able to get that done, that means they probably got other stuff done on their robot. And it probably put some time and detail into that. Just little things. These are the esoteric things that scouts look for. Please don't make your first pick based on bumper construction. And please don't think you're gaming the system if you go out and create perfect bumpers, but your robot is using tennis rackets to pick up cargo. How to do match scouting. I think you need to have at least 3 to 6 people. Some teams like the Citrus Circus have 18 scouts in the stands. I don't understand what Mike Corsetto was put in their water to make that happen. Forcing people to scout. A lot of the times, scouting is for the kids who couldn't make the pit crew and couldn't make the drive team. And that's a travesty. Because this is like a really important part of the team, and it needs to be valued. If you force scouts to scout, they will come back with unreliable data. Can you imagine taking someone who's not interested in watching robots and forcing them to sit through 80 qualification matches in a day? I love watching robots. Sitting through 80 qualifying matches is terrible. Even with the best teams, it's awful. So if you're forcing people to scout, you will get unreliable data. So you need to find a way to make it fun. And you need to find a way to make it valued. So here's a way to guarantee that your scouts aren't going to take scouting seriously. They go through the whole day. At the end, they give you a binder or a USB key with all this data. And the drive team just takes it and chucks it in the pit and goes home. I've seen so many teams do that. And your scouts at that point, well, why am I spending all this time doing this and no one's even looking at the data? That is a great way to ensure that your scouts will never give you something usable. And when you do need that data, it's bunk. The best scouts in first are valued by their teams. And scouting is not an afterthought. And treating scouting as like a backup to the drive team and the pit crew is a great way to have a culture that doesn't value scouting. How to make scouting fun? Play games with it. I mean, on 11-14, we like to gamble. Not with real money. We made fake money. It's called SimBucks. But like a great way to get people to pay attention to the matches and care is like before a match, we'll be like, okay, 2056 is in this match. Will they score more or less than 11.5 game pieces? And people make a bet with their fake currency. But we don't just do it with the best teams, because that would be easy. You've got to give them an obscure team, which then challenges them to make sure they're paying attention all the time. And the people who are good at paying attention will get better stuff. Some scouts will start flipping through the data to try and get answers. And that means they're using the data in a useful way. And so that stuff is really, really important. I want to talk, we're coming close to the end of this presentation. I'm going to run out of time. So I want to talk about something important when it comes to scouting. We talked about it with sample size. It's tiny. So in FRC, a lot of people use average game pieces per match as a really good metric. First of all, a lot of teams don't use true averages. They just kind of like look at their best matches, which is dangerous. I like using average, but the average does not tell the whole story, because a team could have gone 0, 0, 0, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9, 9. Or a team could have big dips and the such. And I like to look at 4 values. I like to look at the team's minimum, the team's maximum, the team's average, and that's it. Yeah, average, min, max is probably good. Oh, and lowest non-zero score. Because I can throw it, usually when a team scores 0 game pieces, usually they lost comms or something, and I can throw that out. But if I'm looking at 4 data points and the team's only playing 12 matches, why am I not looking at all 12 data points? And I like having a nice visualization where I see team 1923, number of game pieces scored in each match. That visual, as much as I am a numbers person, that visual helps me to see which direction they're trending in, what their peaks and valleys are. And also, when you're planning a match strategy, I hate just going off of average. I need to know the maximum that my opponents have scored to know what the worst case scenario is. What could we be going up against? What are we likely to be going up against? And what's the best case scenario? So that's why looking at mins, averages, and maxes matters. Oh, I had a slide on that? Yeah. When did I do that? Wow.
Thank you.
Did you just make that?
I didn't make it.
Okay.
I switched to it without you asking me.
Well, thank you. That's amazing.
You're welcome, friend.
Mind blown. I do not remember making that slide.
So one of the things that we worked on with our scouting was we looked at what you were talking about, but one of the things we struggled with is taking into account defense. So when they were being defended against or when they were defending and how we took that into account.
That is a great question and applies specifically for this year. Do I have a slide about defense in the next one? Okay, I don't. Okay, I was just checking. This year's game, if you just look at teams' raw numbers, there is a huge difference when a team is defended and undefended. So how do you know? So number one, it is important for scouts to track whether a team was defended or not. Number one. You could try and track how long they were defended for, percentage of the match they were defended for, all those sorts of things. But at its core, you need to know if the team was defended. So I think this is important for 2 reasons. One, to look at teams' defended average and undefended average and compare those. 2, for trying to pick a defense spot. It is hard to figure out who is good at defense, but the best way to do it is, I like to look at a defense spot, what they did in a match against a very good team, I would like to look at what that same very good team did while they were undefended to see what that delta is. I've been working on trying to create some new metrics along this line where you basically create a baseline for a team and then you look at how defense bots affect teams' baselines to try and get an average amount of game pieces denied as a metric. I think that is a cool goal for everyone in this room, all the data scientists, and to see what you can come up with. I know there's some teams out there who have come up with stuff. They're just keeping it proprietary right now. I'm not keeping anything proprietary at this point, but I'm just saying that I still haven't fully captured the magic of it. But I do think at a base level, take the defense robot, look at them against good teams, and then look at what the good team looks at undefended. But that requires your scouts categorizing when a team is defended and categorizing that properly. I brought up the 771 example from provincials, and I mean, they took Team Dave from being one of the best scoring robots in the world and turned them to an average robot. Why this is really important as well. So this year, okay, if you, I'm not going to phrase it with a stupid hypothetical, I'm just going to tell you. A lot of teams always think you should send your defense robot after the best robot on the alliance. That is a mistake. Teams fall into that trap. But the best team on the alliance is usually the best team because they're also the best team at scoring while under defense. I like to go after the second best scorer because usually they're the ones that you can bring their average down the most. There is a reason we sent 771 after Team Dave and not after 2056. People thought it was crazy to leave 2056 undefended. They went and did 16 cycles. It was really impressive. And they lost. But because we went after the weak link. Think about wildebeest in the wild. When a lion is chasing the pack of the wildebeest, the lion does not go after the fastest wildebeest. The lion goes after the slowest one, the one with 3 legs. Even though their meal has 1 less leg, they're going after the slowest one. And thank you. We are running overtime at this point, folks, so if anyone wants to leave at this point, that is totally cool. I will not be offended. I understand if you have places to be. I'm going to keep talking until someone kicks me out. Oh, okay. I'm being kicked out. That's how that goes. Okay, I really want to wrap this up, but remember, don't always defend the best team. Let's go blast, keep going. Alliance selection, oh, I can't believe I missed this. When you're doing alliance selection, just remember, trust yourself and no one else. If a team from another division comes to give you advice for alliance selection, they are there to mess you up. They're looking after their own self-interest. Do not trust teams outside your division unless you know them really, really well. Championship brings out a crazy cutthroat amount of competitiveness from some teams. I'll tell you one story, the worst story. There's this one team, I won't name them, but at one point, they didn't want to talk to a team about alliance selection, so they had one of their kids pretend he was deaf. Actually happened. And that other team, for the next 2 years, thought this kid was deaf. But every year at championship, there will be a team, especially if you are not expected to be the number 1 seed in your division, and you seed number 1, you will suddenly have all these new friends offering you advice. Guess what? Most of them are not your friends. Be very, very careful. Some of them, this happened in Canada. One of them, no, I can't do it. I can't do it. We're running late. Next slide. Not important. Skip. Can we go to the last slide? If you're going to remember anything from this presentation, remember those 2 golden rules. Scouting is the easiest way to make your team successful at a competition. Each first match, we didn't talk much about strategy, but I think what's really important is you're all passionate people. You all have goals. Take what you've learned in this presentation and take it forward and figure out how you can improve your team the best. It may just be that you are now the subject matter experts and you are taking this information forward. This video is going to be available on YouTube. It's going to be available on Twitch. Have lots of people watch it, learn from this stuff, but also, nothing great was achieved without enthusiasm. You guys have the enthusiasm. You can do great things. I will close this presentation off with a quote from one of my old economics professors. Before our exams, he would always say, I would wish you good luck, but that would be a waste of time because luck isn't a real thing. So instead, I will wish you success. I wish you all success this weekend. I wish you all success as you go on with your high school careers. I wish you all success with your lives. Good luck, everyone. I will be available if anyone has questions up at the front of the room.